It's Josh Rubin with the Rubin team. Let's go take a look.
All right, party people, in the place to be. It's Josh Rubin with the Rubin Special. Today is Wednesday, March 20th. Happy spring. It's about time. I've got to tell you, the spring here in New York is one of my favorite seasons. And it's up, it's down, but hopefully coming this week we'll have nothing but beautiful weather. And I'm joined by none other than my friend Alex Wolking, Chicago's finest. What's going on there today, Alex?
Not much. Just busy day at the office. How are things there in New York?
Beautiful. Busy as ever. And we've had some interesting news. Obviously, we have the Fed decision today. Who knows what we might hear from the Fed. I think that they'll probably stay the same and, the market will remain stable, but that remains to be seen. But bigger news comes this past Friday. Our friends with the National Association of Realtors decided to throw in the white towel and settle the class action lawsuit coming out of Kansas City with our friend Michael Ketchmark for $418 million. What's the word on the street with that in Chicago?
You know, there's a lot of training that's coming out about it. There's a lot of discussion that's happening. The big thing that we're hearing right now is that for the time being, buyers need to have an exclusive buyer agency agreement. So the days of just kind of going out and having them sign something right before a contract, those days are gone. So there's that, and just clearly articulating and spelling out, how we're compensated and how we explain that to our clients and who's paying the fee. That's really the biggest change, and those are changes that probably should have been made anyway. So it's a lot of fear mongering, but I'm not that worried about it.
Yeah, I think that there's going to be ultimately a sort of a reversion to the mean. And you're going to have this automatic spike in uncertainty and people not knowing which end is up. But, the savvier buyers that I'm in touch with, these are people who are 50, 60 years old. They've been through at least 2 or 3 transactions in their adulthood. They all feel the same way. Hey, we need an agent. We definitely need an agent. And in fact, we need somebody to tell us the pros, the cons of the different buildings, the nuances, the blocks, the neighborhoods, the good, the bad, and look out for our best interest. And not only that, but make sure that we're able to get the best price on the best terms, right? It's interesting, Alex, you probably know that I do a lot of direct mail marketing, and I have a lot of conversations with prospective sellers. And of those who I determined bought without the help of an agent, it's interesting because they all have one thing in common. And that is that if I go back to the time that they bought, whether it's 5, 6, 10 years, they usually have one thing in common, in that they, if they bought the right property, that's one thing. But more importantly, chances are they overpaid for what they bought. So when you work with the right agent who is going to be patient and focused on you and your needs, they're also focused on getting you the best possible price. So, it's really important that people do have representation. Going back to Michael Ketchmark, the lead counsel in this class action lawsuit in Kansas City, I'll bet you that Michael wouldn't recommend that you go into court without representation. So the same can be said in a real estate transaction. In fact, it's probably more important than litigation, because it's much more likely that you'll actually be involved in a transaction of the purchase of a home than you will in litigation. That is to say, if you remain on people's good side. So
I don't disagree with anything you just said. And to add to that, my dad's been an agent for 31 years. And so I grew up in the business. I always joke that I'm an SOB. I'm a son of a broker. But my dad's great rule of thumb has always been a great agent should be worth their weight in gold, which means they should be able to save you at least their commission. And that's, at least that's just rule of thumb. And, that's I think you bring up a great point about, would you go to court without an attorney?
Yeah.
It doesn't really work that way. So I see it as a positive thing. I see these changes as it's more transparency for the consumer. It's going to force agents to prove their value proposition. Most of my business this year, Josh, I've been the second agent that people have called, and where they listed or they were working with another buyer's agent they weren't happy with, and come the new year, they wanted to go a different direction. I've gotten a number of clients this year where I'm the second agent on the job. We're the third agent. I love those. I love those clients because they know what they're looking for at that point, whether they're buying or selling. Or they know what they're looking for in an agent. But this change is going to force consumers to make better decisions about who's representing them, and asking more questions. And I think it's great.
Yeah. Well, now, as they say, now more than ever, who you work with matters. And when there's uncertainty and somewhat volatility and higher rates, it's really important that you work with somebody who is, as you said, worth their weight in gold.
Absolutely.
So, Alex, as somebody who, literally grew up in the business, did you know that this was something that you were always going to do?
I get that question all the time. Yes. So the joke is that when I was 12, my dad, the quick story here, my dad was, similar to any other real estate agent, was flying by the seat of his pants one day, and he was coming around the corner. He's like, I need you to log in. There's this portal called the MLS. I need you to log in and type in this number and print this sheet off. I'm coming around the corner. I need to grab that, and I'm off to my next showing. I'm like, all right. So I printed it off, we took it out to him, and I went back in. I'm like, what's this MLS system? This is kind of cool. And I was 12.
Yeah.
And I spent hours in that thing. And I was like, this is all these properties, and like, you can see all this information. I just thought it was cool. And then I asked my mom to take me to open houses, and she's like, I'm not taking you to open houses. I'm like, okay, fine. I'll just go on my bike. So I went to open house around my neighborhood, and I went on my bike. I was 12. I introduced myself. I said, my name's Alex. I'm Jerry Wolking's son. And they're like, oh yeah, we know Jerry. And that was how I learned the market. And then when I was 16 and got my driver's license, I went to 229 open houses that year. And it used to be the joke that we could drive down any street in any neighborhood in any town. I knew the listing agent, the property taxes, the price history, and everything else. So I was like a mobile MLS before the app became a thing. And I would go into my dad's office. My dad was very good about not forcing me into it. He just kind of fostered my curiosity, but never pushed it on me. And I think that's a mistake a lot of realtors make. But anyway, I would go into my dad's office and work after school, and I would have agents come into the office and drop stacks of listings on my desk and go, have you been in any of these? Oh, I've got a client that's looking for this. Do you know of anything coming on the market? And I would just rattle listings off. So I just always had that encyclopedic knowledge of a market, and learning it in a very small town, Iowa, USA, where I grew up. That was where I learned how to pick up on market nuance. That was how I learned how to price. So by the time I got my license when I was 19, I could price just about anything. And that was great training.
So you just sort of grew up with this natural curiosity. Your dad happened to introduce you to it. You knew it was what he was doing, and you were probably curious as to what he was doing. And then he kind of just happenstance was running late for something and had to grab up this fact sheet one day. You printed it off, and the next thing you know, you dug a little deeper into the MLS when a lot of kids are playing Dungeons and Dragons, or God knows what the kids play today. You were actually in the MLS, and you were basically gaining this knowledge. So you really have a sort of an unfair advantage over your competition, in that you had this natural curiosity, and you really dug deep on learning, as you said, the sort of market nuances. But that's not just something that you can study for. You have to. It's almost like an athletic scale, right? Yes. Like sure, you can go on the field and you can swing the bat, or you can try to catch the ball. But some of these players on the field just have this natural ability, and that's what separates them from the little leaguers from the major leaguers, right?
Yeah. Oh, totally. And that was When I was in high school, I became even more fascinated. I wanted to learn more about financing. I wanted to learn about the homes and the process of building a home and home inspections and what's that thing and what is a furnace intake, like that kind of stuff. And I just became fascinated with houses and just overall the actual real estate itself. And I remembered it wasn't until I was sick from home from school one day. And of course, my dad took me with him. And then again, this was probably about 12 or 13 at the time. And he took me to this showing. It was a single mom with two girls, first time home buyer. She was in a 2-bedroom apartment. And we went to this house, and something about seeing it and like the girls picking out the rooms, because the girls were about my age. So I was like, oh, what room's going to be your room? Just as a 12-year-old,
Yeah.
helping dad out. And back in those days, before DocuSign, you had to sign a contract, wet sign it. So we went across the street. There was a Wendy's across the street, and we settled down. And I remember watching my dad work. And I remember watching him explain the contract, explain the grants that she was getting as a first-time homebuyer, explaining all that. And you could tell, you just see the fear in her eyes, but you could see what she was trying to accomplish for her daughters. And I was just so fascinated with the conversation, and I didn't care about talking to girls. I wanted to hear what dad was saying.
Right.
And I remember later that night when he called her, and I'll never forget this. It's like ingrained in my memory. He got the call saying that, from the listing agent saying they got the house. He hangs up, he has this smile on his face, and he starts to call her. Types in her number, calls her, and he looks at me and says, watch this. And I was like, okay. Answers it, and he tells her, he's like, congratulations, you got the house, it's yours. You could hear the excitement, and she started crying on the phone.
Yeah.
And I saw how happy my dad was, and I thought to myself, I'm like, wow, my dad's pretty cool. I want to do that. That looks fun. And I was just hooked after that. Like that's, and so I went to DePaul. I was originally going to go for theater production and management, to either be a producer or a talent agent. And then I met the theater kids, and I said, hell no, I'm not spending 4 years with these people. No, but DePaul, I wanted to be in a big city, and DePaul had a bachelor's degree in real estate. It was more so about commercial and investment and finance and that sort of thing, but it was still real estate, and it was in a big city, and that was the only school I applied to, and that's how I ended up in Chicago.
Great. And so you just never left.
Just never left. Well, I did leave right after I graduated for 2 years. I got licensed when I was 19. And I started selling real estate in Iowa, and I would go home on weekends to work. I went home every summer over the holidays. And so by the time I graduated, I had a full book of business there. So I went back there for 2 years. And then in early 2016, about a year and a half to 2 years after I graduated, I'm like, I'm not staying in Iowa. Like this sucks. I'm not doing it.
Right.
So I made the leap, and I came back to Chicago September of 2016, and I started building my business all over again from scratch. So,
and how did you do it? I mean, for those coming in, in 2016, at least you had the internet, right? When I was coming into the business in '96, we did not have the internet. It was kind of like literally doing business with chicken scratch and a Rolodex.
That's pretty, that's so. I love that you said that, because having grown up in a very old school way in a small town, I mean, that's kind of how I built my business. I did not buy leads. I did not go. I mean, I had a social media presence because I'm just kind of an outlandish character and a little eccentric anyway. But I really did rebuild my business one door at a time. When I was in, most of what my career has been, Josh, has been just very unique homes. I did a lot of historic homes, a lot of, vintage, landmark properties. That's a lot of what my business is focused on. And, I love selling the hard stuff, the stuff that no other agent wants, give me that. And I'd much rather cut my teeth on that than another 2-bed, 2-bath condo. So,
right. You mentioned vintage and unique or historic homes. Tell us a little bit more about that and how you found that niche.
So I had actually gotten a listing. To your point, when I was first starting out, I did a lot of direct mail. I did door knocking. I did expireds. I mean, I kind of just tried everything to see what worked and what I liked best.
Mhm.
But I got an historic listing from a postcard that I had sent out to an expired listing, and I went after, really, as a 19-year-old. Not many people are going to trust you to sell their home, and what I found was the people who did trust me were people who had homes that no other agents wanted. So I had to go for the low hanging fruit, but I also had to go for the stuff that no one else would touch, because those are the only people who would hire me. So I got a listing. It was tough to sell, but I saw what this neighborhood was trying to do. It was an area that was still in a bit of transition, um, but I saw the community that was there, and I believed in that neighborhood. And the crown jewel of the neighborhood was going to be coming on the market. I had several other neighbors who had referred me to the seller. I had this house so I got the listing, and I actually won the Zillow and HGTV.com Dory Award for best DIY dream home, because it was this massive 12,000 square foot mansion that needed everything,
Wow.
and it was kind of falling apart. And after I listed that and got a ton of national media and press coverage because of what the house was, I started getting calls from other large historic mansion owners around the area saying, "Hey, I hear you're the guy for a house like mine."
Wow.
And it just spiraled from there. So then that was in the Quad Cities. Then when I came to Chicago, I used that story and I did the exact same thing here. So I got heavily involved in my neighborhood. I give architecture tours every summer for free. I still do those. And I got involved with Landmarks Illinois, which is a statewide historic preservation nonprofit.
Uh-huh.
So I started, I knew my demographic is like, I always joke, it's a lot of high net worth people, but they're a little out there. So it's like weirdos with wallets.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you've got if you've got a bizarre art collection, or if you've got millions of dollars and drive a Subaru, you're probably one of my people. Like that. So that was, and I enjoy that. And, that was how I found my way into that crowd. And a lot of times, in my neighborhood, I do a lot of parties and a lot of gatherings and a lot of just introducing people.
Mhm.
I actually saw, there's a building that I've worked in several times where, as you know, in New York, I mean, the doormen of these buildings are the gatekeepers. I mean, they know everything. They know everyone's business. I
Yep.
sat in a lobby one day during an open house and I watched this girl named Rachel. She's a door woman, I should say, down at
Door
a
person. Yep.
door person. There you go. She's a door person at a building I do a lot of business in. And I watched her work. She
Mhm.
knew everyone's name. She knew everyone's kids' names. She knew the grandkids' names. She
Wow.
knew the pets' names. She knew who had a dietary restriction and everything. And I took inspiration from that, and I thought, I need to be the door person for my neighborhood and make it so that I'm a fire-breathing dragon guarding my castle and nobody else has a way in. And I picked a neighborhood that I liked, that I felt strongly about, that I thought that had a lot of potential and a lot of growth, that I could do a lot of growing and thriving in, but also a neighborhood that didn't have a lot of competition.
Yeah.
A neighborhood that's been overlooked by other realtors. That's really what I found my spot to be, is go where, path of least resistance. That's where I had the biggest impact, because if I can make an impact there, that'll go to the neighborhoods that do have, larger presences. And that's where I'm getting calls now, is I'm getting calls from the other high-end neighborhoods going, "Oh, you can sell a $3 million home in Buena Park. Do you want to list my $5 million home on the Gold Coast?" I'm like, yeah, I can do that. It's unique.
And how did you identify the neighborhood that was sort of overlooked or underserved?
Great question. So two things. One, I live there. That's kind of what I'm just drawn to naturally as a lifestyle. I don't want to live, if Lululemon is right outside my door, I'm going to hate it. Like that's too bougie. It's too waspy. I hate that shit.
Mhm.
So that's not my vibe. I usually go for something, that's got some charm, character, just a little bit of grunge. I'm a fan of that. But so I look for energy. I look for architecture. But the other thing too is I looked at sales over the last 10 years, and I looked at how many homes are in this area, what's the turnover, which came out to about 5% at the time, which was high. And I just looked at the total number of sales and the transactions that I wanted to do, and I looked at who's the agent that's name keeps popping up over and over again. Because if an agent name pops up at least 30 to 50% of the time, it's not worth pursuing. So but there was, and over the last 10 years, there were several transactions, and not one agent had their name on at least 2 sales. So I knew there was wide open for competition, and no one really wanted to work that area that hard. Yeah. So that was how I knew it. It was statistic, but also just a gut check.
Huh. That's interesting. So it's a combination of looking at the turnover, right? And then to see if there's any concentrated agent or agents in that market. Right. And if no one really has, a dominant share, then it's ripe for the picking.
Right. And it's a combination too, Josh, of I have to like what I sell. Like I want to enjoy what I sell and the people I work with. So, the numbers could look great, but I hate the neighborhood. And then it could be, I love the neighborhood, but there's 6 agents who are all competing for it. I'm like, it had to be a sweet spot of a combination of the two. And that's what's worked out really well for me anyway.
Yeah. So Alex, if you had to do something else, what would it be aside from real estate?
Oh, if I wasn't in real estate at all?
Yeah.
Oh, I would probably consider either being a talent manager, agent, producer, something in show business on the business side of it. Yeah. I'd probably do that. I also considered running for political office for alderman here in Chicago at one time, but I don't think I actually want to do that. That's just it's something I do for fun, but I don't think I'd want to do it seriously. So,
did you ever have any experience working for or working in politics while you were in school or anything?
No, I never. Actually, we just had our Illinois primary yesterday, and there's one candidate for Cook County State's Attorney, Eileen O'Neill Burke, that I really rallied behind her. And the election still hasn't been called yet, but it's the most involved I've ever been in an election. And it went with a political candidate. It's been a lot of fun. And it's been a very interesting experience. I did not expect to infuse so much energy into my business, but also just me personally. It was very rewarding.
Huh. And did that increase sort of your brand awareness somehow with your
especially my high net worth clients? Of all people, I did not expect it. I hosted a coffee for her, and I had about 30 people show up, and I raised $12,000 for her in that one 45-minute coffee. Wow. That was incredible to see that. Yeah. And that was a value add to clients that I did it more for me and because I really just love this candidate. But also, people like the proximity to power and feeling like they actually get to meet whoever may end up holding that office. I had no clue that it was going to have that kind of impact. So,
did you consider at all that it might be polarizing and work in the opposite direction? So if you have clients or people in your sphere of influence that are sort of rooting for the other people, that might have the opposite effect?
That's where I think my own value as an agent comes in, where people know that, yes, they may have differing political views, which is to be expected. But I framed it in the sense that, especially when I hosted this coffee, I'm like, even if you're undecided or if you don't agree with this person, come anyway and ask your questions. Make it an open, encouraging environment and not polarizing. That was, and actually I had, Eileen is more of a moderate, and I had people who were Bernie Sanders, borderline communists that came to this. And then I had people who were MAGA Trump supporters all sitting in the same room. Wow. And so it was because of how it was pitched and how I put it out there, people ate it up. I was not expecting it to be that kind of an event. And that was an eye opener because I was afraid of that. I was afraid of the polarization, and it wasn't polarizing at all. It was actually a very fun and informative event.
That's great.
Yeah.
Good for you. Well, of course, Barack Obama hails from Chicago. Yes, and I think he still has a residence there, if I'm not mistaken.
Sure.
Definitely has family there. And, he got his start on local politics, from my understanding. And he went on to be, I think, one of, if not the singular greatest president of our generation. And it's interesting how we went from, this sort of one extreme to the other with,
Right.
Trump being elected, and he recently clinched the GOP nomination. So it should be an interesting next 8 or 9 months, or until November, right? So however many months that is, probably about 6 months. But it's definitely interesting that you have interest in politics.
Yeah.
But the business management side of theater, and or you could get into being an agent. That's something that I considered, actually. Oftentimes I'll think to myself, well, if not real estate, then what? And short of being a taxi driver here in New York City, which I think I'd be very good at, I think that I could definitely get into, being, the next Ari Gold or something similar. So,
I'd see that for you. I could see that.
yeah. And so, coming back to the Sitzer-Burnett case and the NAR settlement, a lot of people are up in arms. People are saying there's not going to be any buyer agency anymore or compensation from the seller to the buyer's agents. But, my sense is that, everything will be just fine. There will be certainly more clarification around who's representing who and how people are getting paid. But, going forward, let's say 6, 12, 24 months out, in a lot of other countries, buyer agency simply doesn't exist. If you go to France and you want to see six different properties, you have to contact 6 different agents. But, if you were to look into your crystal ball, what do you see happening?
So people have brought up the European argument to me before, and here's my argument. We have done real estate the same way for over 100 years. And we've also have buyer agency people forget sub-agency. Sub-agency was a thing and up until about the mid 90s. And then buyer agency became a thing late 90s, around the time you got in the business. So it was, so people are still wanting to be represented. I don't think buyer agency is going to go away. I do think the role may change a bit, but I don't think it's going to go away. And, also when you look at people, countries like Europe or places like Europe, if you look at the UK, for example, there's no requirement to getting your estate agent license. You can print off business cards and bam, you're an estate agent. There is no licensing. So, there is I think the nature of our market is very different. We're also a very litigious country. And I think people like to hide behind their attorneys and hide behind their realtors and, want somebody to go to bat for them. So I think there's going to be more expectations of buyers. And I think I don't see where they're going to want to go directly to the listing agent. Now, have I gotten calls in the past from buyers wanting to see some of my listings directly? Of course. And I always ask, are you represented? And if they say no, great. Here's your disclosure showing that I don't represent you. Anything you say to me can and will be used against you in a negotiation. Some people are fine with that. Some people aren't. I don't think they're going to go away altogether. I just don't see that, especially when NAR puts out that statistic that 93% of home sales last year had a buyer's agent involved.
Right. Well, that's what I say, Alex. Yeah. At the end of the day, 98%.
Oh, 98%
transactions. I'm not talking about the NAR statistic.
Oh, sure.
I'm talking about the Josh Rubin experience over 30 years.
Yeah.
And that is that 98% of our transactions involve the cooperation of another agent. Mm-hmm. So do you as a seller really want to carve out 98% of your market and just say, hey, we're no longer going to be paying buyer's agents. So we're reliant upon A, buyers finding us, B, buyers being qualified, and C, buyers being ready to actually be in what we call the decision-making phase of their search to in turn give you an offer that is not just a lowball offer, right? But an offer that is clearly a representation of what we all agree is market value based on recent sales that are similar to your home.
Right.
So I've taken listings, not just in the last few days, but the last couple of months since the initial jury verdict was reached for $1.8 billion against the plaintiffs, in this case, NAR and the co-defendants. And I said, you know what? This is all about the consumer not having had a choice to make as far as the commission that they're paying.
Right.
When in reality, every conversation that I've ever had with the seller is all about, hey, it's up to you.
Right.
I like to kid around and say that I'm a 501c3, a charitable organization, and you decide what you're willing to give me. But in reality, I typically work for 3%, and we encourage the cooperation of the brokerage community. And in so doing, we want to incentivize them to bring their buyers, and we offer them 3% as well. Now, if you have an alternative to that, I'm happy to hear it.
Yeah.
And, we just did a deal where it was 6% if we reach a certain price threshold, or 5% if it was below that.
Interesting.
And the 5%, that's with the idea that the commission was split. The seller was happy, and the brokers were happy. We ended up getting them a cash deal that was actually $20,000 more than they were willing to take. In this case, they were willing to sell their apartment for 1.6. They said, "Hey, we just want to get 1.6." I said, "You know what, Mr. Seller, I think there might be an opportunity here to get you a little bit more. Let me go to work for you." And we got them $1,620,000 from a cash buyer. So we actually got them more than 1%, more than they wanted to sell it for. But that's a story for another time. My point is that sellers understand the mechanics of what it takes to get them the highest price.
Right.
Now, will there be new ideas that come from this, and different models that come up? That's been the case my entire career. I remember 20 some years ago, there was a little company out of the UK called Foxtons, and they were coming around and they were trying to adopt a FISBO model with added exposure, and they were charging people, I can't remember, but it wasn't even a point to sell their homes. Well, whereas Foxtons today, my bet is that your generation of professionals hasn't even heard of them. So, and if you haven't heard of them, then the consumer certainly hasn't heard of them. That's because they're not even a thing anymore. So at the end of the day, buyers need to be advised, and are buyers going to end up paying? I don't think so, but I think that they might sign certain disclosures that say that they're aware of the relationship and the mechanics of how they're getting paid. And I've always told people that, hey, the seller pays our commission, but guess what? Guess where the seller gets the money to pay our commission? It's from you, the buyer.
That's right. Well, and you bring up a great point too about, innovation and changes in ideas and everything else. I mean, to your point, I swear every 5 years there's a new business model popping up, and there's a shiny new object. And, I remember when, in the Quad Cities where I'm from, which is, 2 cities in Illinois, 2 cities in Iowa. And, it's a very, very blue collar Midwest market where, a spit and a handshake still means something to people. And the for sale by owners are 22% of the market there.
Wow.
And because you've got sellers with no equity, buyers with no money, and FHA is very common financing there. And people, you might buy a house for $200,000, which is high end. You might buy something for $200,000, and in 5 years it's worth $210,000. It just doesn't have the equity growth, and now it does. But, I think people, because they're trying to get around having a broker involved. And to your point, I've seen some real messes where people have bought without an agent, and they think they're getting a deal because there's no commission involved. And you walk in like, you overpaid by 10%. There's I just had that, just 2 weeks ago. But I mean, there's always some new shiny object that's trying to disrupt the market. And a lot of times, they do well or they fizzle out over time. But here's the thing that people forget, though, Josh, is we are in a very hot market. Look what happened in 2007, 8, and 9. Most of the competition got out of the business. And those business models that are, the shiny new thing, right now you could fog here and sell a house. Like it's not that hard because the market is supporting it itself. We have high demand and low inventory. That is a recipe for an easy market. What's going to happen when the tables turn and you go back to, like I tell people, when I got licensed, coming up literally in 10 days is my 13-year anniversary of being in real estate. My first listing was a for sale by owner that I converted. My second listing was a short sale.
Wow.
And what happens when the market turns? Everyone's talking doom and gloom. I don't think that's going to happen. But when the market slows down, that's going to take a lot of competitors out whose business models all of a sudden don't work anymore. And, I think that's what people forget. And so, wait it out long enough. it's a resistance training is what it is. As longer you can stay in the game, you'll be all right.
Yeah. It's interesting. You said something earlier that you have a recipe for the perfect market to support itself by way of supply and demand.
Yes.
And of course, we know that that's economics 101, right? That's what makes a market. It's really not about the commissions that are paid. So one economist was interviewed the other day in the wake of the initial settlement announcement. Mm-hmm. And he said that due to buyer agency being changed, that the price for homes is going to decrease commensurately, when that nothing could be further from the truth. In reality, we're going to have the price for a home supported by the market. It's not supported by the participants in the market. So there have been a lot of people who have gotten into the business, particularly in the last few years since the pandemic, because as home prices have soared, people are looking at it as sort of the great unveiling of a fantastic career. And it's true, you can have a great career in real estate, but you have to have the toughest of tough skins. It has an 86% failure rate. So that means that only 14% survive. Of those who survive, the average agent out there is doing 10 transactions a year. So if you go to markets like the Twin Cities, or I'm sorry, you mentioned back in Iowa, right? The four cities or whatever. Yeah, so, but if you go to those markets where the average home price is $200,000, you do 10 deals. That's $2 million in volume that you do per year, right? So $2 million, you're making 50, 60 grand if you're lucky. So certainly not ideal. And that's part of the reason that I'm sure you're doing what you're doing in Chicago, and I'm doing what I'm doing in New York, because the average home price here is $2 million. So if you do those 10 deals here, that's $20 million. That's closer to a living wage. Right. But at the end of the day, a lot of people lose sight of what it takes to do one transaction, let alone 10 or 20.
That is, oh my God, you hit the nail on the head. The thing that I think people get into real estate is think it's going to be easy money. And until they get into that first transaction and they see the nuance and the emotion, and in your case, you guys have way more co-ops than we do. I've got a co-op transaction going right now, but you've got new construction and vintage properties and a lot of red tape. Like, there's so much to handle on one transaction. It is not that easy. As some deals are easy, absolutely. Some of them are a pain in the ass, and that is really. I mean, you get some deals that will keep you up at night. They're so bad. And
what's your most memorable deal that you've done?
Oh my God. Prime example. I think it was probably my fifth or sixth transaction. I had a deal that was they were going VA financing, and it was a for sale by owner, and I was representing the buyer, and it was a house that was being flipped. Long story short, title, the seller's attorney dropped the ball on title, so we had to close 10 days late. My clients are being kicked out of their rental because the new people moving into their rental were waiting to move in. My clients were literally living out of a moving truck, and the seller was being so incredibly difficult and obstinate, and finally we had to beg the seller to let us move at least their stuff into the garage. And then we get to closing, and it was a dry closing, and the seller just flipped out, and it was very stressful. It was the lender wasn't great.
You said it was a dry closing?
Dry closing.
So for those of our viewers who aren't familiar with what that is, why don't you tell us?
So you close on a property, but you don't get paid on it until a couple days later.
Got it.
So the seller, so we had to close. So my buyers took ownership of the home, but there was no funds transferred because the lender screwed up the wire transfer.
Oh my God.
Oh my God. And then the seller, she was threatening lawsuits, and it was just a bad situation. Again, this is like my 5th or 6th transaction. I mean, closing was delayed 3 or 4 times, and it just became a huge nightmare. And then we find out there were repairs that we had asked for that didn't get done. So it was a mess. And of course, you learn from those transactions too. And those I tell agents when they call me, because I'm kind of like their pseudo managing broker, where they call me for questions anyway. Yeah. And even though I'm not the managing broker, they still call me. But it's those years of hard fought battles and bad transactions those are the transactions that make great agents. And if you don't have, if you get a group of realtors sitting at dinner and you're overhearing a dinner conversation, they're all bitching about attorney review, or they're all complaining about, some war story transaction that they've had that's a mess and a nightmare. But that's the stuff that makes people leave. It's hard to get started, and then when you do get a couple deals and you see how difficult it is, it's the constant hamster wheel, and it's the hamster wheel that has a couple broken spokes in it. It's just,
those spokes are known to stick me in the rib from time to time.
Yes, absolutely. And sometimes the wheel needs to be greased because it doesn't spin. So it takes a lot to be a realtor, and it takes a lot of grit and determination and patience and staying power. And it just takes a lot of discipline, and just you have to come from a place of curiosity, because that's and growth and adaptability. Because if you don't have those, you will not make it. And I think that's what this whole change is about. I'm anxious to see who stays and who goes.
Yeah, well, that's what a lot of talk has been about the last few days. Is who actually is able to sort of make it through, and this is one of those moments where only the strong will survive. So yes. We'll see what happens. So Alex, this has been great. I really appreciate you joining us for today's episode of the Rubin Special. Again, joined by my friend Alex Wolking from Chicago. He's among Chicago's finest, and he was he was Rookie of the Year according to the National Association of Realtors, and one of the top 100 professionals in Chicago. So for anyone who's looking for help in Chicago, Alex is clearly a shining star, having grown up in the business. So this has been great. Thanks for joining us today, Alex.
Thanks for having me. This has been fun.
Absolutely. We'll see you soon.
Sounds great.
Hi, it's Josh Rubin with the Rubin team.